as we approach 9 days away from the first game to be kicking off in the MLSisback tournament, I am going to start doing videos this week that's going to be related to the MLSisback tournament. And I'm going to begin with talk about 10 MLS teams that I think could be the favorites heading into this MLSisback tournament. Now, as usual, whenever I do these kind of video, I always will say that if I didn't put your team on the board, or if there's some teams that I put on the board that you might have disagree on, let me know in the comments below. And it's also important to note that this is not a prediction of who I think is going to win the MLSisback tournament, and that unfortunately I am going to jinx some teams by putting them on the board, so I want to apologize that beforehand. But since I know there's a lot of websites that have already released articles talk about who is going to be the favorites heading into this MLSisback tournament, and there's already a lot of odds maker putting odds of who exactly is the favorite of heading into this MLSisback tournament, this is the reason why I have to make this kind of video to talk about who exactly could be the favorites heading into this tournament. So with that being said, let us actually get into it. And to keep it fair, I am going to do 5 Eastern Conference teams and 5 Western Conference teams that I think could be the favorites heading into this MLSisback tournament. And we start off in the Eastern Conference with Atlanta United being the first team that I think could be the favorites coming out of the Eastern Conference and winning the whole tournament. Now, I understand Atlanta will not have Josef Martinez in this tournament, and they won't probably get Josef Martinez at the earliest in the latter part of this season or in the latter part of the playoffs in this season. But despite the fact that they don't have Josef Martinez, I think they are still considered favorites, mainly because I'm pretty sure if Atlanta fans watch this video, they're going to be very upset if I didn't put their team as a favorite of coming out in this MLSisback tournament. But I think the other main reason could be the fact that, if Ezequiel Barco and Pity Martinez could actually shine in this tournament, then they could really be a team that can go deep in this tournament. Like, I think both of these guys, this has got to be a coming out party for them, and that this has got to be the biggest tournament in terms of their career with Atlanta. Because right now, both of these guys, we know they haven't really lived up to the expectation of when Atlanta signed them a couple of years back. And that if they can play well in this tournament, not only they can, of course, let Atlanta United all the way to win this tournament, but they can really live up to the expectation that they, of course, pay them, and also increase the transfer fee that they potentially are going to sell these guys in a couple of years. So that's the reason why I think Atlanta could be the favorites heading in this tournament and could win the whole thing. But moving on, in terms of the second team that I think could be a favorite is NYCFC. Now, I understand NYCFC have got off to a really rough start to this season. They haven't won a game or scored a goal this season. And I know a lot of people will always point out that NYCFC is one of those teams that whenever they get into the playoffs, they find any ways to try to choke in the playoffs and get eliminated in the early rounds. Well, as much as I know that is true, this is a good opportunity in this tournament that if they can win this tournament, they can really apprehend and prove people wrong that they can actually go deep and win a tournament, and that choking label that is put in their name could be temporarily gone with the way that if they can win this tournament. And when you also look at this squad looks like a squad that I think can really go deep in the tournament. I think this squad is probably the most balanced and most deep squad out of the entire league. Like, literally, when you look at their starting 11 and their bench, most of those guys can be in the starting 11 of any MLS teams. And lastly, I think, yes, I understand they got off to a slow start, but I think mainly that has to do with them getting a new coach in Ronnie Delia, and that maybe he hasn't really figured it out in the first 2 games, and that now that he has like 3.5 months to try to figure out and maybe adjust some of the tactics that can get the best out of these players out of NYCFC, and also he has that 2-week training session leading into this tournament. I have no doubt NYCFC is going to be much better than they look in the first 2 games and could be a team that could be a threat of going deep in this tournament. But the third team that I think out of the Eastern Conference that could be the favorite, and this one is probably a no-brainer, it's got to be Toronto FC. Like, they are probably one of the team that is very well suited in terms of these tournament style, and that in the past we know that they have gone deep in multiple tournament in the Canadian Championship and also the MLS playoffs, as them and Seattle Sounders are the two teams that have reached the MLS Cup 3 out of the last 4 years. Now, the thing that I do have a little bit concerned about TFC heading into this tournament is going to be the health of Michael Bradley and Josie Altidore. Not quite sure if Bradley is going to be fully fit heading into this tournament. And Josie Altidore, we know that since he have returned to Toronto and returned to Canada, and that he has to do that mandatory 2-week self-isolation period, he's not going to be available for this team in terms of full team training until early July, and just a couple of days before TFC kick off their first game in the MLSisback tournament. But at least with that problem, that might be a little bit of an issue in the group stage part of the game, where they probably won't have Josie Altidore for the full 90 minutes. But once they get into the knockout stage, I think they should be able to have him for the full 90 minutes. And that when you just look at how the squad is, this is definitely a squad that can really go deep in the tournament, and it has proven wise in the past. But heading into number 4, in terms of the fourth team that I think could be a favorites heading into this tournament, and this team, I don't think a lot of people would think that this team could be a favorites heading into the MLSisback tournament, but I'm gonna put Columbus as one of the team that I think could be a favorite, and that I'll also give a little bit of a spoiler about tomorrow's video when I look at the 5 dark horse team that is coming into this MLSisback tournament. Columbus is going to be one of those teams. I mean, I've been saying it throughout the off season and heading into this regular season that I really like this Columbus team, and I really think they are really the dark horse team heading into the league this year, and that they secretly have a very decent starting 11 on their hand. And I also really love some of their off-season addition, getting Lucas Zalarian from Tigres and adding some more creative kind of power into this team, and getting Darlington Nagbe from Atlanta, and that he of course reunite with Caleb Porter, and that he should be solidified that crew midfield that looked very good in the latter part of last season. So I think this team could easily be a team that could be a sleeper heading into this tournament and can really surprise a lot of people, and I won't be surprised they will be a team that could go deep and potentially win the whole tournament heading into this tournament wise. And then finally, the last team that I think out of the Eastern Conference that could be the favorites heading into this MLSisback tournament is, of course, the Philadelphia Union. So, the Union obviously have a squad that is mixed with young and veterans kind of players. And, throughout this season, I know they suffered that 2-0 loss against Dallas, but I was very impressed of how they really gone toe-to-toe with LAFC and earned a hard-fought free draw at Bank of California Stadium. And if they can play like that heading into this tournament, this could be a very dangerous team, and a team that you definitely do not want to face. And also the fact that when you look at the past history in terms of tournament-wise and in terms of the U.S. Open Cup, they have reached 3 out of the last 6 U.S. Open Cup final, and albeit they have lost all 3 of those U.S. Open Cup final, they're a team that has had a history of doing well in terms of those tournament-wise. And again, if this is a team that can play like they did last season, and a team that could really show that they can go toe-to-toe with LAFC, the best team in the league, this is a team that you should really watch out for heading into this tournament. But now I'm going to look at the Western Conference, and we start off in first in terms of the Western Conference. And speaking of LAFC, that is the team that I'm going to put coming out of the Western Conference that could be the favorites in terms of this MLSisback tournament. And actually, I shouldn't say they could be the favorite. They are the favorites heading into this MLSisback tournament. Like, if you look at multiple websites and multiple odd maker that have put the odds of who exactly is going to win this MLSisback tournament, LAFC is right at the top of that list. And it's not surprised because this is by far the best team in the league. And it's kind of shocked the fact that last season they weren't able to make it to the final, though albeit, as I mentioned a little bit later, there's another team that I think could be a team that could win this tournament and might be the biggest Achilles heel of the reason why LAFC might be not able to reach it to the final and win this MLSisback tournament. And I think maybe the other Achilles heels might be the question about Carlos Vela, and that I have heard a lot of reports saying that he might skip out on this tournament, and that LAFC without Carlos Vela is kind of similar to Atlanta United without Joseph Martinez, as they lose a very key players in their team, and we don't know whether or not if they, of course, could have that same impact if they don't have Vela in this team. But still, I'm assuming if Vela does play for LAFC in this tournament, there is no doubt this is a team that I think is going to be the one to beat, and that it's going to take maybe this team that I'm going to mention, and I might as well just put them on there for the sake of it, that I think might be the one could once again stop LAFC reaching to the final of this tournament. And that, of course, is the Seattle Sounders. I mean, the Sounders, they did it last year as the team that stopped LAFC from reaching MLS Cup, and I have said it multiple times last season that I think if there is one team that I think could really stop LAFC besides themselves, it's got to be the Seattle Sounders, with the way that they look very good when they play against them in the regular season, and hence in the postseason they were able to cause that upset and win 3-1 against them at Bank of California Stadium. And knowing the fact that the Sounders, just like TFC, as I mentioned, a team that have a lot of history of doing very well in the tournament, and unlike TFC, actually do well in terms of the tournament and winning the whole thing, that's why I think the defending champ could be celebrating another championship and another silverware coming into their franchise in terms this time to be the MLSisback tournament. And that, the other thing I also want to think that Seattle is a big favorites heading in, and unlike LAFC, is that they have a much more easier group to reach to the knockout stage. Like, they are literally in the easiest group out of all these groups heading into this tournament, and I would be absolutely shocked if Seattle does not move on into the knockout stage and actually get out of such an easy group that they're in Group B of the MLSisback tournament. But moving on, in terms of the next team, and this one, I'm going to take a little bit of a gamble by putting this team on here, and that, of course, is the Portland Timbers. And the reason why I say I put a little bit of a gamble is because they have not looked good this season, and that in the beginning part of the season, they looked something similar to what happened in the latter part of last season, and that is a team that just struggles at home, and a team that, if there is one big weakness that the Timbers have, and that, of course, is they just, whenever they have the ball and trying to kind of control the game, they aren't able to do that, and they aren't able to find way to break down opponents. This is a team that is very good in terms of counter-attacking, and I think a lot of team knows that, and that is why a lot of team have really just kind of sit back and let the Timbers to see if they can, of course, break them down. However, the reason why I still put them down here is because, despite the fact that they are in that tough Group F, I think that being in that tough Group F kind of favorites the Timbers, knowing the fact that a lot of those teams that's going to face against them might actually not decide to sit back or just control the game, and that really will play right into the hand of the Portland Timbers, and that they can use that counterattack to their advantage. And also knowing the fact that they also have a history like the Seattle Sounders of whenever they get into tournament, they are able to reach deep into that tournament and reach the final. Most recently in the 2018 MLS playoffs, when they went all the way to MLS Cup, despite the fact that pretty much every single game that they have to play in that MLS Cup playoffs was on the road. So yeah, Timbers, I think they could be one of the favorites heading in this tournament, although it's a little bit of a gamble, knowing the fact that I'm just worried the fact that if the Timbers and if Giovanni Savarese does not figure out how to find a way for his team to break down opponents throughout this tournament, this could be a big problem for the Timbers heading into this tournament. But yeah, at number 4, in terms of the teams that I think could be the favorites heading into this tournament, and I'm going to put my team on here, and that, of course, is Minnesota United, the Loons. Again, I have big expectation about the Loons heading into this playoffs, and I know in the first 2 games, I try my best to hold my excitement in terms of how the Loons have played, because the way that they play in the first 2 games, they look like they're the best team in MLS, the way that they have played. And that if they can, of course, play like that throughout this tournament, then this team, no doubt, is going to be the team that can go really deep into the playoffs. Now, that being said, that the reason why I might be a little bit concerned is that, can they, of course, do that? Because if they cannot replicate what they did in the first 2 games, then this could be a little bit of an issue, because they are in what I think is the group of death and in that tough group D that they're in. But I'm confident that they can, of course, repeat that, and that knowing the fact that I know they have a very solid backline and probably one of the best backline in the league, and probably one of the best center back partnership in Iko Para and Michael Boxall, I think that could, of course, enhance the performance of the team. And the same goes with the midfield, where in the first 2 games, they absolutely bossed the the first 2 games, they looked very solid in the midfield. I wouldn't say they bossed the midfield against the Timbers, because they were kind of just counter-attacking in that game. But against the Quakes, they absolutely bossed the Quakes in terms of the midfield, and that some of those midfield players like Jan Gregorish and Ethan Finlay has really looked good in terms of these first 2 games. And then let's also not forget, goal scoring, as I said before, this was a big issue heading into this season, but it seemed like that issue might have solved, because Luis Amarilla, who made a bold prediction that he's going to score 25 goals this season, he's already got 2 in the first 2 games, and it's already on pace to score 34 goals. So if he can continue to do that, yeah, this team is definitely a team that should be feared with. And even though, again, I know they're going to be in that tough Group D, and that it's going to be very tough, and they need to be at their best in terms of moving into the next round, I believe they can do that. And that, again, I just have a lot of high expectation that the Loons can do very well heading into this tournament. Speaking of Group D, the last team that I am going to put in terms of the favorites heading into this tournament also come out of Group D, and that, of course, is Sporting KC. And putting Sporting KC there is kind of another little bit of a gamble in terms of picking them in terms of being the favorites in the MLSisback tournament, because they're coming out of Group D, and since Group D, as I said before, is a group that I think anybody can potentially move on. There could be a case where these last 2 teams that I put might actually not find themselves moving into the knockout stage. But for Sporting KC, like Minnesota, they have looked very impressive in the first 2 games. Albeit, the first 2 games, they have placed probably the easiest opponent out of any team that have faced their first 2 opponents this season. I mean, against Vancouver, who is regarded as one of the worst teams this season and a rebuilding team, and the Dynamo, pretty much the same thing. There's not going to be a lot of people that's going to be very, very wowed about how Sporting KC, or there's not going to be a lot of people that's going to say Sporting KC is an immediate threat, when they of course are able to beat 2 very beatable kind of team, which is also why I think heading into this tournament and heading into group stage, it will really prove the fact that whether or not if Sporting KC is actually for real, and that the first 2 games that they just dominate their opponent, can they do that when they actually play against much tougher opponent? And I think they can definitely do that, knowing the fact that they had some very decent player, and they of course make that big off-season acquisition by getting Polito heading into this team. And I also forget that despite the fact that they don't have Felipe Gutierrez in this tournament, because he had unfortunately suffered that torn ACL, almost forgot that they actually got Gadi Kinda as one of their off-season acquisition. And I didn't really made a lot. I didn't really kind of say that was a big addition for Sporting KC, knowing the fact that I didn't really know a lot about him, and that whether or not if he can make some big impact for this Sporting KC team, boy, oh boy, he has made some big impact with the Sporting KC team. Like, the first 2 games, he has already scored 2 goals and already got 1 assist. And if he can continue to play like that, that would be a solid replacement for Felipe Gutierrez. And that I don't think Sporting KC fan will realize that they miss Felipe Gutierrez if Gadi Kinda can play just like what he did in the first 2 games. But, again, I think again, as I said with Sporting KC, if they can, of course, when they face against real competition and that they can, of course, replicate what they did in the first 2 games, then they can, of course, go very deep in this tournament. And also, if that defense, which I know they, of course, get Winston Reid, which would be a huge boost to their defense. But the question is, if that defense doesn't hold up, and that if Winston Reid, who we know he is a guy that has a history of being injured a lot and is very injury prone, then that could also be another issue for Sporting KC. But if Winston Reid is not going to be injury prone and he can play pretty much throughout this tournament and the back line can hold it together for this team, I think this is a SKC team that could be looked as something that happened for the something that happened in 2018, which is a very dangerous SKC team and could potentially be the favorites heading into this tournament. But there you have it. That is pretty much it in terms of what I think are the 10 teams that could be the favorites heading in this tournament. And as always, let me know in the comments below, and let me know in the comments what you think of some of these teams. And if I have left out some teams that you might think could be the favorites heading into this tournament, or disagree with some of the teams that I put here on the board, let me know in the comments also. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.